it isolates the cloud provider of backup and restore. Currently, so a person would have to just implement the say delete list logic with multi-chunk or without multi-chunk. This thing supports. What it does is this is the file in our directory.
Menü ab. Okay, good morning. We start the meeting. We have a change of schedule. We recognize that we have a lot of topics we would like to discuss with the community, so we will change to a weekly meeting schedule. It's not yet decided if we do the meetings in the other week on at the same time, or if we provide a time which is fit like to attend from US. Which is currently almost impossible if they don't get up during the night. So I will send out a poll and then we'll decide, and I will send out an update of the meetings. Today we have 3 topics. Axel will talk about a first glimpse on extensibility. Then we have Pablo from SUSE who wants to discuss about architecture and future plans regarding extensibility. Maybe some of the questions are then already answered by Axel. And in the end, we have Ismail who will talk about the stack, give an overview on that. I would like to ask if there's anybody new who joined the first time today, then maybe he can introduce himself. Okay, nobody speaks up, so I think everyone was already here. So I will unshare. Axel can take over.
Right. Should I start?
Stop share.
Okay. Just let me know when I should start.
You can take over.
Okay. Just give me a sec.
We do not yet see your screen.
Yeah, coming up in a sec. Okay. Yeah. Yeah. All right. So I hope you can see the PowerPoint.
Yes.
Perfect. Okay. So yeah, today just a very first glimpse at Gardener extensibility and the rationale behind it. What I'm going to say before starting with this thing is all in here. It's basically just like the very concepts behind it and the thing that we wanted to actually address with extensibility and where it might go to in the future. As of now, there's not that much there yet. We have already in the main Gardener code line, we've brought in extensibility for operating system configs. But yeah, also probably during implementation, we will have to address a lot of issues that will arise. And yeah, this is basically just to show us the rough strategy of what we want to achieve here. All right, just to bring everybody on the same page. In general, if we have a garden cluster, in the garden cluster, we currently have the seed and the shoot YAML, and the Gardener controller manager operates on those two. The seed YAML represents a seed cluster. As of now, we don't really care about what it actually is. It just has to have a kube config and a reference to cloud profile. And the shoot YAML, of course, represents a shoot cluster. Now that's where extensibility starts to jump in, because in the future, we actually want in the seed cluster to be able to create custom resources. Like there you see already right now we have the operating system config, we have the workers, we have maybe something like a control plane YAML. That's, as said, this is still in discussion, and probably we will face more issues the more we dive into extensibility and really implement it. And those resources are being actually operated upon by seed controllers. Those are then the real controllers that have to be somehow brought into the seed cluster. And those controllers will then in the end ensure that there is a control plane, that there are workers for the shoot, so that the shoot is so that shoot can be created. Extensibility. So to sum up already here, extensibility is about having those resources in the seed cluster that represent parts of the shoot, and having those controllers that can act upon these resources. Yeah, those controllers, how we get them in there, it's also already described in the proposal we have for that so-called controller installation. But yeah, this is also currently heavily being worked upon by us, so I'd like to exclude that for now. But yeah, as said, you can still read through the proposal. This is just to explain basically what we wanted to achieve with that. Yeah, basically to talk about the how we want to achieve reusable components and extensibility in general. We have something like a shoot hierarchy, where we basically say how our CRDs interact with each other, or how our custom resources, not the definitions, but the custom resources interact with each other. So basically a shoot has a shoot represents a cluster which somehow has a control plane, somehow has worker groups, worker replicas, which need eventually the operating system config and produce the machine that eventually end up in the node in the shoot. Yeah, as said, this is totally not to scale, and this was rather a non-technical presentation that I have here, because this was yeah, this is a rather non-technical representation here. The actual names differ. For instance, machine, we have the machine deployments and the machine controller acting upon them with the machine classes. But yeah, this was basically just a very simplified view on how this all is. And what that means for a cloud provider or anybody that wants to extend, yeah, I will just give that a quick jump over. So for everybody that wants to extend, this actually means that, I mean, before Gardener had this fixed flow of how we deployed all the parts of a shoot, and all those parts, they were being encoded as code in Gardener. That was actually the problem. So as soon as you wanted to add a new cloud, you had to go to Gardener and change this thing. But now we want to change that and represent the parts of the shoot creation flow basically as custom resources, or as any resource on which a controller then can interact. And in this example, I've shown it for the AWS controller manager. As I've written there, actually, you would require several controllers, but for simplicity, I represented them as one. And as you see, for instance, when we deploy the control plane, this results in us deploying the Kube API server and the Kube controller manager. your extension controller is then able to webhook into those deployments and, for instance, mutate something or also leave it as is. Then, for instance, the Gardener tries to create a cloud-specific DNS for which the AWS controllers respond with creating a Route 53 DNS entry. The cloud-specific infrastructure CRD results in creating VPCs, security groups, etc. via the Azure controllers, and finally, the cloud-specific machine CRDs result in creating EC2 instances. And that's really the core idea of extensibility. We want to have the flow. Basically, we want to encode it as CRDs, and we want the cloud-specific controllers to act upon those CRDs. And what I can already show you right now let's see whether this is possible. I think it might be a bit difficult. All right, what I want to show you right now, we already have this right now in Gardener extensions. There we already, that's basically our repository, a temporary home where we want to develop all the extension controllers that we as Gardener maintain. This still does not stop you from an external vendor to develop your controllers, because the API is still in the Gardener main repository. But here in this repository, we basically host all the controllers that we as the Gardener team develop. So for instance, what I can show you right now, we already have two controllers, basically OS Chorus and OS Chorus Alibaba, because Alibaba needs some tweaks in order to work. And yeah, the OS Chorus controller is basically a controller that is able to create operating system configs for the Chorus operating system. So that's basically the part. And yeah, this is how far we are right now. We just have started with the very first controller, but upon popular demand, we wanted to share what we are doing there and what our rationale behind all this is. And yeah, if you want to see how the controllers themselves are being currently developed by us, you can always have a look at this Gardener-extensions repository. But as said, this shouldn't stop you from implementing your own controllers in your own repository, because the API is still in Gardener. And you can already go ahead right now with what we have. But yeah, we will refine that, and it's alpha, and yeah, still heavily ongoing, heavily in progress. All right, that would be it from my side.
Thank you, Axel. Any questions to that? Or maybe Pablo can directly join to this discussion. I think it's a nice continuation of the topic, probably.
Oh yes. Thank you for the presentation. And yes, basically my point is like I've been interested in joining in this discussion about the architecture. I've seen the documentation. I was following the pull request when the extensibility framework was introduced by means of the station registry or operator registry concept. But I haven't found, and it's probably just because I'm just joining this project a few weeks ago, and we have this break over the holidays, but I haven't found a way to keep on this conversation going. As Alex mentioned, that there have been some discussion about the architecture. I don't know how this conversation is going and how to be part of that and get feedback to the discussion on the architecture. That's the main point. I mean, basically my point is I'm at SUSE. We are interested in participating in the architecture. We have some specific ideas that we were to discuss with you. I think this is perfect timing because you are just introducing these changes in the architecture. What, by the way, we found is very interesting path of the development. But there are some more specific stuff, like for instance, your definition of the cluster. We will be interested in aligning that more with the cluster API effort. You already adopted the machine controller concept, but so far I'm not really sure you are also adopting the cluster part of this specification, which are independent. I mean, there are not necessarily that you do. We as SUSE are interested. See what plan do you have. So there is a certain list of topics that we would like to introduce in the conversation. And to be honest, I haven't found a way to move this forward, just because I don't understand really the dynamic of the groups. How do you discuss this? If you have some specific meetings or instances for discussing these kind of specific topics, that's probably not everybody now in the call could be interested. I mean, I understand there are more people who are probably more interested in discussing operational aspects, or or deployment aspects. But so that's more or less my point.
So basically, for you to sum up, it means that you basically wanna see more what is happening in extensibility and what we plan to do there, and you want to participate and bring in your ideas there.
As a concrete objective, yes. As a meta objective, is more like how to make this discussion sustainable over time. I mean, because for us, if we engage in this project in the way we pretend to do, that will require us a lot of effort, and we would like to be part of this ongoing conversation. I understand that probably, and sorry to say something which is not true, but I understand that being this a project that grows inside SIP and a large part of the development happens there, I suppose there are a lot of conversation ongoing just because you work together. I mean, it's natural and normal. The same happened with some project that we have in SUSE and we maintain somehow. But what basically we would like to have is take part of this architecture discussion as a ongoing effort, mostly now that there are a lot of changes, because I think that would be beneficial. And probably bring other people that might be interested, not in Gardener at large, but probably in specific aspects of how we implement some part of this cluster management. Mostly you finally can align this more with the cluster API effort, because there's a lot of interest there.
Yeah. I mean, what we are. I mean, that's basically what I said at the beginning of the presentation. So, I mean, we started basically with the smallest, easiest point of extensibility with the operating system config, because we know anyways that this will work. But I mean, like, I know there is the cluster API and it's ongoing, and the thing is, we're also not sure yet how we can implement all those things. I mean, we're at the very bottom, and we have to work ourselves up, and then we can basically continue with the discussion how we want to adopt maybe the cluster API. I mean, we still know, okay, already we know that we want the machine API, but using the machine API does not exclude the cluster API. But yeah, I mean, this is really just it's, as said, it's heavily ongoing on our side, I guess.
Yeah.
And you're definitely very welcome to shape the process here, how we work. I mean, you said in the Gardener extensions repository, you can see how we develop our extensions, and we will also definitely lead the ongoing discussion, or try to continue with the discussion in the Gardener repository in the extensibility proposal.
Okay.
I think that's really our main entry point for how we want to proceed. But the main thing is that, I mean, it's just very difficult to see how to proceed right now. We're working ourselves up at the moment.
Okay.
Maybe I can add a little bit there. So as you already know, that cluster API itself has two main parts, right? One is the machine API and the other is the cluster API. And from machine API, I think you are already pretty aware that we have adopted almost like 80 to 90% of it. And rest is there because we are in one or the other way trying to check if what we have, like provider ID and so on, if those fields can also be added in the cluster API. And that part is going on, and that at that point I think we are very good to go. But on the cluster API part, if you try to engage more into the open source project, that you would know that there are a lot of uncertainties there yet. So community itself is not very sure that what is the right way to go. And what we are doing at the moment is, for example, we were in KubeCon Seattle last time, and we got a slot for probably there was a face-to-face meeting with the entire community where folks from Google, Heptio, and all the big companies joined. And we got a chance to present the entire Gardener architecture for almost 1 hour. And the feeling that we got, I think there are also minutes available on the internet, and the idea of manager cluster, that what we are doing, right, managing clusters via one other Kubernetes cluster, was very well appreciated. And it turns out a lot of companies are already internally trying to achieve something very similar. So the way at least I see is the adopting the cluster API is one way of looking at it, because cluster API itself is in a V1 Alpha 1 stage, and if we adopt it now immediately, then it's very high chances that they will change something and then we will be bouncing here and there. But rather I see it in a way that because we have a heads up, and what we are trying to do is to direct the cluster API itself in a direction where what we are doing with the manager clusters and the APIs that we have, right? But as you would also be knowing, if you have dealt with the large open source projects, it's generally not very quick. It takes time. So if you present an idea, there will be at least 10, 20 questions here and there. You have to answer those questions. You have to come up with the strong proposals. And when such disruptive ideas are coming up, then it requires more and more time. So I would say at the moment, before the V1 Alpha 1 gets cut in the cluster API, we are just trying to inject the idea of my manager cluster concept. And if that idea gets enough conclusion, if the idea gets enough, I would say, consensus in the community, then more or less, if not now, in future, we will see that this pattern will also be adopted by the cluster API itself. So adopting is just one way of looking. The other way of looking is that we have to drive the cluster API itself in the right direction, because they also require the input from the companies like us, where we have already got the heads up and trying to achieve something similar. Right?
Okay. Yeah, I agree. Okay. But my last question is how to proceed. I mean, what's the best way to engage in this conversation? We are really interested in engaging in this conversation, mostly because we see a lot of commonality in interest, and because we already have in place this agreement to collaborate around the Gardener project, but mostly as a way to explore this cluster management option. So this is something that I would like to see. I don't know now if we are adopting as a group this idea of having weekly meetings is the best way to move forward, or create kind of a Gardener architecture interest group meeting that can be probably just for the people who wants to really dig into these specific topics. I don't know what's the best way. I talk about meeting because I think that mostly at the beginning, before we can shape anything, having conversation is more productive, like dropping a document, which have a, for brainstorming documents are probably not the best medium, but it's really think that the way to go. I can probably I will ask some of you to help me to shape in determine. I don't know exactly how do you manage this proposal, but probably just introduce a preliminary proposal of some idea that we have around the cluster API, mostly because we think we would like to decouple like the two stages. I mean, we like the idea of the seed cluster, but more like an implementation of the concept of the cluster API, and the Gardener cluster like a higher level of manageability, and this clear cut for us in the architectural point of view is something that we are interested in dig into. And eventually, as you said, as the cluster API effort matures, moving in that direction, but being prepared for that in the future. So if you think that is the best way, I can submit an initial, I would say, proposal, and most like a discussion on the repository for extensibility. Is that the way to go, you think?
I would say that is actually the very nice way, and we have already discussed it. So what makes it stronger is, of course, it's very nice to know that if from the SUSE, if you can somehow support that you are using the Gardener and you also feel that this architecture is the right architecture, then you can have a joint proposal between SUSE and SAP, which will definitely make it much stronger than only SAP publishing it. And the main idea of that proposal should be that what's there in the cluster API right now, what are the pain points, and what could be the migration path to the way that what we are doing with the Gardener. So I have one small attempt already to make that proposal, but I need a lot of refinements, and probably if you need, we can probably, Vasu, you can also add something. We can probably add, work on the same proposal and make it available to the community itself.
That would be great. Yeah.
Yeah. Hi, Pablo. This is Vasu here. First of all, it's well appreciated that you're getting active here. And I think we had a group a discussion in the group mailing list on this. On the one hand side, the question is how to move forward. You always need practical inputs, on a theoretical basis, as you've seen what we're doing in the Gardener extensibility thing. Those are working proposals, and we are shaping the extensibility by code, not by theory and architectural diagrams, right? So I think the best way for you, I also feel what the difficulties are. I think the best way would be, for example, if we can set you up with the Gardener as is on Amazon or on Azure, and then we start and pick out certain parts of it and see how do we get SUSE's opinion into it. Starting with the operating system configuration is a low-hanging fruit. It's not only a low-hanging fruit from a development part, but also from the commercial part, because we want SUSE operating systems in our deployments to be available, right? And we just have to take that step by step. And the discussion, your feedback actually also resulted in that we are now doing a weekly, and also the question of incorporating other time zones as well. That we are increasing the weekly for bi-weekly to weekly community meetings, and then obviously most of the discussions, once you have practical inputs, will certainly be on an issue, on a GitHub-based cooperation model. And besides that, we can obviously have individual teleconferences with the individual developers, right? We're very open to that. And so this is the Gardener kind of collaboration part. And let me just state a few words on the cluster API. So I think if you just look at our shoot YAML specification, there are a lot of key value attributes which can be directly mapped into the cluster API specification. There's no semantic difference, just a syntax, more or less. But the easy part are the most common denominators, which everyone can build a consensus about. Network CIDR specification, pod CIDR. But the difficult part is in the cluster spec is hidden behind a provider config blob, more or less. Let me call it blob, right? As Gardener, we are not trying to solve only one specific infrastructure. We need to be able to argue against a multitude and a multi-cloud essentially specification. So therefore, the provider config cannot be intransparent to us. It has to be, we have to be able to argue about that. Right? And that is essentially the difficulty. In the end, if you think about it, the easiest way to be cluster API conformant is to say, we take all of these common denominators, which we are also agreeing about, and agree on the cluster API spec as driven by the community, and we'll create our own Gardener blob, right, as a provider config blob. But that I think, and this is what Hardik mentioned, we want to get a higher level of consensus out there. Right? I hope that kind of helps.
Yeah, I agree that there are some ongoing conversation about a further refinement in the cluster API to be more transparent, or separate the clear way the common denominator with the cloud provider specific part. That's something that is probably not, well, actually, it's not going to make it the version 1, beta 1, alpha 1, because it's just introduced. But I hope that it will come into the next iteration. And I personally interested in that because handling that as a blob, I mean, that opaque, stuff there in the middle of a CRD is like not nice. But I think that, yes, I mean, I agree that there is some refinement required there. But going back to the initial comment about the code, is like, yes, we're interested in that, and obviously, but it's also true that in the same way that you first had a discussion about the general idea about extensibility, and then you moved into proof of concept, we want to have some initial conversation about this alignment between the Gordon concept and the cluster before we get into some code, just to be sure that you have a minimum ground to work. Otherwise, it's going to be harder to move forward. And the final comment I would like to do is that I cannot talk back for SUSE in general. I work for this container as a service platform group. Basically, we're interested more in, I would say, not the whole kernel, because it's a huge piece of software that had a lot of functionality, high-level management. I personally, I mean, my group is we're more interested in what's happening in the seed downstream. I mean, how do you actually have an API where you can basically create new cluster and manage the cluster lifecycle more than the other parts. So for me, as you said, that's why I have not started like deploying the whole government and playing with it, because for us it's more interesting to know what's happened there. That was part of my comments in the initial messages, that I have some I won't say concern. I mean, it's more like I'm not too sure about how some stuff is placed in the architecture right now, and how do you plan to move? Because now that you are moving to this concept of the around extensibility, probably they will move around. So that, again, very specific architectural questions, just to have a clear picture of what you're thinking right now, or what we think is it will more interesting for us in the future development. So, because basically we want to have a clear separation, so that you have an API you can manage for external tools, because it's not necessarily that we are going to, or our customers are not really going to have all these requirements. That I was like surprised the other day, is like somebody was presenting this dashboard, and then you present a search for cluster. You say, what? You need to search for the cluster? Really? I mean, what scale are you talking about? And what's really, I mean, it's like, it struck me like, wow, you need to search. You're talking that many that you need to search. There's probably our target are much smaller setup. Will probably you have 10. You can actually handle your cluster like pets because you probably have 10 of them, or So that's also something that we like to balance, because our use cases is probably not to be exactly the same that you are targeting. It's like a smaller scale. And that's why for us, splitting stuff in a clear way is probably an important requirement. Not now, but I mean, as evolutionary path. That's the point. But I mean, besides that, I mean, I'm really happy to be part of this, and I'm really impressed with what you're doing, and really like the concept behind extensibility. I really like it. So I think it's a good path. And in general, I think that we should refine ways to work together.
Just one comment from my side. Right now, if you look at the cluster specification, like the cluster resource itself, I mean, like our shoot resource is more or less like an abstraction on top of it, because we have like hibernation, we have like backup schedule and some additional features as well that are built on top of it. So going forward, one possibility as well is to simply create a cluster resource like from the cluster API with only like with the quite specific things, and have all those abstractions that are in the Gardener just be handled like in some other way as well. So this one is also like a very possibility as well, in my honest opinion.
I will later pass you like I don't have it on. Well, actually, I don't have the link to the document, but this proposal for having a clear way to split this common part for the provider-specific part. In that case, Gardener will be the provider as a cluster level, not infrastructure level, and then you can have your own stuff. It's like a little bit putting stuff in a clear separation. I really like this proposal, but the document is not yet available because the person who was submitting it was like an internal document. I need to ask for approval for their employee to make it open source. But as soon as this is available, I will ask you, because I think you will like it.
Okay,
great. I was mentally making this exercise yesterday, and I think that it will solve a lot of problems, because you have a richer definition of a cluster than the cluster API. And personally, there is no clear way to make that extension, so to speak, or reach the definition. And this proposal is to make it a clear way to say this cluster is a Gardener cluster, and therefore there is the Gardener specific stuff. And this is more generic definition. So I will, as soon as I see that, I will pass you over the group mail list, probably, or another way. Okay, or the next meeting. This is available on the next meeting.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah. Okay, thank you. Then as the last topic, we have the logging overview.
Yep.
Ismail?
Yep. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Oh, okay. Let me share my screen. Okay. Can you see it?
Yes.
Okay. Hello, everyone. Today, I would like to give an overview about the logging stack and share with the community what's done so far and what's coming up. Basically, this is the agenda for today. First, I would like to start with the motivation about having a logging stack. Maybe most of you already know, but I would like to revise once again what's coming out of the box from Kubernetes, where are the gaps, and why we need to have a logging stack. Then we'll see what is cluster level logging. We'll have a look at the architecture along with all of the building blocks, and then we'll have a short status update and a small demonstration. So the motivation, the easiest and most frequently used logging method for containerized applications is to write to standard output and error streams. The container runtime usually includes multiple logging mechanisms. If we talk especially for Docker, these logging mechanisms are called logging drivers. Basically, Docker captures the std out and std error streams of the container and can be configured to write the logs in JSON files, which is write the logs to syslog, journald, or any other destination. For example, if a container crashes, a pod is evicted, or a node dies, the log files are being evicted along with the container. And the lifecycle of the logs is tightly coupled to the lifecycle of the container. On the other hand, a developer wants to access logs for already terminated containers. He wants to access the logs from a long period of time, several weeks or months. Also, the search for logs should be fast and powerful, and all this functionality should be available from web user interface and from command line. However, the native functionality provided by the container runtimes is usually not enough for a complete logging solution. The concept of separation, the life cycle of the pods, nodes, and the life cycle of the logs is called cluster level logging. Cluster level logging requires a separate backend to store, analyze, and query logs. While Kubernetes does not provide a native solution for cluster level logging, there are several common approaches, and one of them is the node logging agent, as you can see in the diagram. The logging agent is just a dedicated tool that exposes logs or pushes logs to a backend, and the most popular agents are FluentD and FluentBit. Also, the common approach includes the log-rotate tool. Basically, log-rotate is Unix tool that can prevent the log files to grow infinitely, and it allows to implement customer retention policy. And we recently adopted it in the Gardener. So you have your pods and your container inside it. Docker or the container runtime handles the streams std_out and std_error, and basically the default behavior is to write them in a JSON file. And the logging agent, FluentD or FluentBit, the logging agent FluentD or FluentBit tells these log messages and sends them to a logging backend. So I would like to also share about what is the scope. The scope is to get the logs from everything that runs in the Garden and the seed clusters. And by everything, I mean any workload that runs in a container or nodes. For example, the kubelet and the container runtime itself, they write their logs to journald. So it should get also them. And what the logging stack is not, the logging for end user is out of scope. They can deploy their own FK stack depending on their needs. This is the architecture that we would like to share. As I mentioned about the node logging agent approach, we use it here with FluentBit. We are using FluentBit because it is fast and lightweight. It is deployed as daemon set in a seed cluster in the Gala namespace. It basically reads the log files from the nodes and enriches them with the Kubernetes metadata, which is requested from the API server. Then it forwards the log messages to a log aggregator. It is FluentD in our case. It is also deployed in the Gala namespace. And here we scale FluentD horizontally, so it can accept all of the workloads. Why FluentD? Because it is more mature than FluentBit and it has a large ecosystem from plugins. In our case, let me just drop this one. In our case, we use the dynamic elastic plugin. FluentD basically sees that the log message is coming from a pod in given namespace, and it forwards the message to the elastic instance in this namespace. We deploy single node elastic clusters and Kibanas in each shoot namespace, and in the Garden namespace, the Kibana is exposed via ingress, and the Kibana is exposed via ingress, and the ingress is available from the Garden dashboard. We also have an Elastic instance in the Gala namespace and logs from non-shoot namespaces added to it. And because of the storing, flushing, and refreshing period of each of the components of the logging stack, the delay of a log can reach up to several minutes. So let's have a look at the components. Fluentd is the most popular logging agent. It can collect data from different sources, can parse, filter, map, and finally send them to multiple destinations. It is open source project under CNCF, and it is written in Ruby. It has a pluggable architecture. As I mentioned, we use several of these plugins, and there is a large ecosystem of plugins. In Fluentd, in our context, in the Gartner context, our approach is Fluentbit to send logs to Fluentd. We have a buffering in Fluentd side. The logs are stored in chunks based on the pod namespace and dynamically dispatched to the Elastic services in the corresponding namespaces. And as I mentioned, we scale Fluentd horizontally based on memory and CPU utilizations. Fluentbit on the other side, as you can maybe see, their logos are pretty the same. They live in the same GitHub organization. Fluentbit is just a lightweight alternative of Fluentd. It requires much less resources than Fluentd, and in the community, it is quite okay to have Fluentbit forwarding logs to Fluentd. Yes, it is written in C, and it is a lightweight alternative of Fluentd. Here in the Fluentbit in the Gartner context, I would like to. It's worth mentioning the log parsers. The guys here made parsers, and now it is possible to filter logs by severity, process ID, or source file name. And I hope you'll see it. We'll see it in the demo. Elasticsearch, the next component, it is a full text search engine, and it makes possible to store, retrieve, and manage semi-structured data. In our case, log messages. Yeah, it retrieves the logs from Fluentd and stores them in a persistent volume. We keep now the logs for up to 14 days. The last component, Kibana. Kibana, as they wrote in their README, Kibana is the window to Elasticsearch. It's quite powerful and allows you to explore Elasticsearch via web user interface. We already have some predefined visualizations in our Kibana deployment, so it's not anymore an empty Kibana instance. Okay, so a brief status update to what's done since 1st of January. We had a lot of bug fixes and chart improvements, along with the usability improvements, the log parsers and the Kibana dashboards that I already mentioned. And one thing that I'm really happy about it is that we found an issue in the Elastic plugin in Fluentd. They now accepted this issue, and the PR for it is work in progress. We fixed in our side, and yep, we will be happy to take this issue back to the guys. So ongoing and future improvements. The prior one will be to make it a stable feature, and we already have some integration and tests, and we'll continue with them. Now, yep, the logging is behind the feature gate. So maybe in the prior one would be to make it stable and not an alpha or beta feature. Also, several things that are in progress. Christian is working on currency integration. Vladimir is working on request throttling in Fluentbit site. Yeah, you also have some backlog about exception detection. to have the whole exception in single log message, not n log messages. So I would like to also say thank you to the guys. I really appreciate their contribution. And this is the guys. So if you have any question or any question about the logging stack, you can try to reach us. So I will now pass to Christian, and he will show us the Kibana dashboards.
Oh, hi everyone, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. So I'm going to show you how does our Kibana looks like and how easily we can use it. So we can find Kibana ingress in our dashboard and let's access it from there. Okay. So we can find it in the logging section and let's go. Okay, so all we need to track our logs in Kibana is in our dashboard. So let's go to dashboards and see how it looks like. Pod logs. Okay, I also wanna thanks to Dieter because he assisted me to do this visualization we can see here. And yeah, okay. So the first table we see here is for the namespaces, our Kibana tracks. So for now it's in this this Kibana tracks only shoot my shoot. The next table we can find our pods in this namespaces, and they are sorted by their walks count. Okay. After that, we can see histogram. It's really nice for debugging and to see the we can see in what time there are a lot of walks, and we can also see which pod is fooding them. For now, it's only for the last 15 minutes. We can change it from here. After that, we have a table with walk severities. In this table, we can see which the count of the info severities, the count of the warnings, and let's suppose we want to track which pods are fooding warnings. We will click here, and here in this visualization, this diagram, we can see that these warnings are from the metrics server, from the machine controller manager, and here we can see the walks. If we let's suppose we know that, for example, machine controller manager is broken and we don't want to track its messages, so I can go here and from this button I will untrack its walks, and for now we can see here only the walks from the metric sheet. And yeah, I think that's all we need for debugging for tracking walks. If we want to remove filter, we can do this from here. And yeah, if I change to look walks on for the last 7 days, it will be changed. Yeah. And yeah, it's all we need, I think, for debugging. Oh, yeah. Do you have any questions about Kibana? And okay, I think
actually, I have a question.
Okay. Hey, it's Bekir from PTC. We have been using Gardener with our own instance shoot. Also, we deploy Kiba on every joint. But
Bekir,
we
you're
have
breaking
our
up.
own stack.
Can you try to change the mic? It's you're very hard to understand.
Yeah, it's very hard to understand.
Yes. Okay, let me try again. So R is heavy and
I cannot understand you.
because for
Let him put the question in the chat.
oh, you don't.
Becky, we cannot understand you. Can you put the question in the chat?
Yes.
In that time, I have a question. So in one of the workflow diagram, you said that Fluent E stateful set, you have a horizontal pod autoscaler implemented there. So does it create, so HPA, so how will it work? So does different replica, don't they share the same data or like?
No.
No, they have each replica has a persistent volume, and it buffers the logs in this persistent volume. And we can scale Fluentd up to 10 replicas, and when a downscale appears, the persistent volume with the buffer is not removed. Does this answer your question?
So about combining the metrics and the monitoring stack and the logging stack. So at this KubeCon in Seattle, the guys behind Grafana actually exposed, actually open sourced, Loki, which is based on Prometheus, and it's more or less like Prometheus, but for logs. And in the future, we might even replace like the Elasticsearch and Kibana with only Loki, and then in your Kibana, in your Grafana instance, you actually have both logs and then metrics from the Prometheus as well. So this is one future. This one future improvement, which hopefully in the future when Prometheus or at least Loki stabilizes, then we are very keen on exploring. Yeah. So this one, as Ismail Christian.
Yep. I totally agree with you. It basically is what we need. The multi-tenancy, and it's nice that it uses Grafana for visualization. But yeah, I think that it is not. At least I don't see any Docker images, any releases. Maybe it is.
Yeah, I have tried it, and it's very alpha right now. It will need. How can we enable docs to have look at? Yeah, I mean, this is right now. Currently, we haven't enabled this by default because there are some security. I mean, when we scanned internally, like the Grafana images, and so there were some small security problems with those, and we currently don't feel confident. But what you can do is more or less have in the yeah. So I mean yeah. So this thing about unification is also on our plans, just to have like a common, so to have like a proxy, more or less, authentication proxy, which is using the same authentication mechanism as the dashboard as well. So this one is also we also want to do in the future. So there won't be any basic authentication, hopefully, and you use the same identity provider as in the dashboard.
Any other questions?
That seems not to be the case. Then thank you, all the speakers, and please upload your slides to the public folder. Google Drive.
Sure. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.